Welcome to the So You're Ready to Date podcast. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Angie. And here's where we talk about all things dating, love, and relationships. And most importantly, having fun.
Join us for practical advice for dating successfully on your terms.
Welcome aboard
and enjoy the ride. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of So You're Ready to Date, the podcast. We wanted to do this particular episode as a nice complement to the previous episode number 54. So hopefully you had a chance to go listen to that episode with our very special guest who talked about her particular experience dating somebody who love bombed her, who turned out to be a narcissist, and the experience of coming into that situation, how she handled it, how she extricated herself. But there was a lot of information in that episode, and we didn't go down that rabbit hole of trying to talk about what is love bombing and what are some maybe hints and not hints necessarily, what are maybe some points that maybe you're dating a narcissist and they're not just a jerk. So we wanted to be Google for you, because we said a few times in that episode, you should just Google this, but we wanted to kind of dive into the topic of how to spot a narcissist, how to spot, am I being love bombed, and to kind of talk about, some of the experiences that our guest had, but with a little bit more of an eye towards the logical side of it, some facts, some information, so that hopefully you come out of this armed with the knowledge and the verbiage and the wordage that you need in case you find yourself in this situation. Also, this is going to be a fairly heavy episode like the previous one was. So if you're not quite ready to listen to it, bookmark it, because you're going to come back. You're going to want all of this wonderful information, and share it. Always share it with somebody who might need to hear it, because that was one of the tips that she said was sometimes people aren't ready to hear you specifically say, hey, I think so-and-so is a narcissist. But it's so much easier to say, hey, listen to this podcast episode. I learned a lot from it. Maybe you will too. As always, we're trying to provide you with the information you need to date safely and healthily. Is that the word? To be healthy when you date, because we want you to have the best, most healthy relationship you possibly can.
And I want to chime in here for just a minute. One of the things that she said at the end of the last episode was talking about how it was a heavy topic and there was some negative energy around it. We are doing our best to bring educational material forward. However, if you are in a space that you are listening to it, I would recommend that you have the opportunity to go do something positive, something uplifting, and make you feel good afterwards to kind of wash this away and keep you on the right track for something positive and to bring that positive energy. We'll remind you again at the end to go do something positive, but just putting that out there that it might be time to bookmark it if you don't have that space available at the end of the episode to go do something you enjoy.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for adding that little caveat of we want you to take care of yourself, right? First and foremost. That is always so very important. So where do we start when we want to talk about how do I spot if I'm dating a narcissist? And it feels like maybe the place to start is with love bombing, because I feel like, I don't know, Angie, if you feel the same way, that's the first way they kind of hook you in, because you're probably connecting over a message or text or maybe a FaceTime. Not to say that a compliment isn't bad. And I think there's this fine line between saying, hey, you are really gorgeous, and trying to be like, I know we haven't actually met in person, but I think you might be the one kind of energy, right?
Yes, and I think that love bombing is a good place to start. Now, that's not the only way that a narcissist will approach you if they have a narcissistic tendencies. And again, I think there is a spectrum of how much of a narcissist someone is. And that is a word that gets thrown around a lot, but the only one that can make a diagnosis of that is a doctor. So there is a difference between a diagnosis and us throwing that word around and somebody who has some tendencies and may or may not be a narcissist. But I do think that love bombing is going to be one of the things that you can watch out for first. And I'm going to put another disclaimer on this episode that most people are good. The percentage is, it's 14% of men and 7% of women are narcissistic. Therefore, your chances of running into someone, well, you have a good chance of running into somebody. Most people are not like that. So we're not looking for ghosts. We're not looking for something that isn't there. But if your gut is telling you that something is off, these are some things that you can look for to say, was this happening if my gut is telling me that I am in a relationship that something is off about?
Well, and also not to say that we're not all of us are awkward at some point. So I feel like sometimes some of these traits of like love bombing and narcissism can be like, maybe I just did something awkward. So again, not trying to find red flags when there aren't any, and not saying that if they did one part of one portion of something that we talk about today that you're like, oh, narcissist. I think, it's, you have to take each situation as it comes up, because yes, it might be something that you need to watch, but as you get to know them, is it something that resolves and you can kind of maybe chalk up to them being nervous or awkward or just trying their best to put their best foot forward too.
Yes. And so going back to love bombing, what we're talking about here is this over the top display of building up your confidence and your dependency on their compliments in the beginning. And while you may not need their compliments, it feels good, right? And you start to get attached to that feeling of people complimenting you. And that really is a way that they get their hooks in and pull you in and get you attached to them at the very beginning.
Well, and especially if it's not something that you have been used to. So maybe you're out of a relationship for a long time, or maybe your family of origin wasn't very effusive when it comes to stuff like that. So I think finding you in various levels of maybe where you are in your self-esteem journey or in your where you are in self-confidence, I think can play a big role. This is not about blaming you. I mean, this is not saying that you're a victim of that because your confidence wasn't at 100 when you happened to meet this person. I think it's just about the fact that people who want to do this stuff can spot where there might be like a little hole in the fence of where they might be able to sneak in, like, oh, this one really got the response that I was hoping for. So I think it's just a matter of, yeah, you might fall prey to it, but it's never about being ashamed of it, because she talked a lot about, and Brene Brown has said a lot, shame needs you to be quiet and to keep it dark. This is about bringing this stuff out into the open. And I think that love bombing spot is a good place to maybe draw like that first boundary, being like, hey, I know you're probably just trying to be nice. It makes me uncomfortable when you do X, whether that's text me 15 times in a row, whether that's text me, you think you're falling in love with me after our, first date, whether all of these things, I think it's a great way to kind of test. Is this just about them being overly excited because you matched, or is this about something more? It's like start drawing those fairly simple boundaries of like, I don't want you to do this. And if they continue to kind of invalidate that and bowl over those boundaries, then I think that's the place where you kind of pump the brakes and start taking a hard look at some stuff.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that makes us attracted to somebody who has those narcissistic characteristics, because in the short term, they appear confident. And as humans, we are attracted to confidence. We are attracted to the strongest mate possible. We're looking for a strong mate because our lizard brain is still talking about survival of the fittest. And so we're looking for the strongest mate possible in order for us to survive and for our family lines to survive. And so in general, people are attracted short term to individuals with those narcissistic tendencies just because they appear very confident. And that confidence can be very attractive. And that's when the love bombing can kind of come in there. So I don't even think it's a matter of falling prey to it, because oftentimes somebody with narcissistic tendencies doesn't even recognize that they have a narcissistic tendency. And this is how they're going about relationships, And so, yeah, there's no blame, there's no shame in it. It just is something that happens. And going back to trusting your gut, and does the compliments, does the confidence, does the things that they're showering you with, does that feel right? Or does it feel like something is off? Remember, I don't know, kind of back when you were maybe first starting to date and the guys in high school would try the same trick on every girl in high school, and you may or may not fall for it, but you're like, I want to be special, I want to be different. If you've taken every girl to, to the beach and to the amusement park, then I don't want to be the person that you take to the beach and the amusement park, that kind of thing. And that's kind of what love bombing is it's kind of a player's game, and this is how they're going to reel you in, even if they don't see it as a game.
Well, it's kind of funny you talk about that because my boyfriend and I were having this conversation last week. We were just sitting around talking about dating, and he was talking about, yes, when he was a teenager, there was like a group of them who had this like set of advice that they just kind of passed around. Like, you're going to ask this question. And then when she says this, you're going to ask this question, and it's going to guarantee you to get. I was like, are you serious? I'm like, you've grown. Luckily, he's grown. Didn't ask him if he's grown out of it because he has, because he obviously didn't. Sure? Because he obviously didn't use the same questions, because I'd have probably called BS on it. But there is, that very spot of like, hey, this worked on this one particular thing. Let's see if it works again. So whether that's the right or wrong way, I think sometimes that's just like horny teenage boys more than anything.
It is, but I think it's a good comparison when you're talking about love bombing, because those horny teenage boys are going to say anything to get those teenage girls to get excited and want to date them. And that's just what they do, because they're looking for that relationship and they need that in their lives to feel validated.
Right. And I think it kind of works the other way for like women. Are you asking those questions because you need to be in a relationship, because you can't go to another wedding as a single person because you don't want to be that odd man out? So we're obviously coming at this from a space of heterosexuality, where it's from our women's perspective, dating men. But like we talked in the beginning, it can go either way. We're not saying that this is a trait exclusively reserved for men. I think, women can be equally as conniving is kind of the word I want, but maybe that's not the best word for it, but they can use this to their advantage to get out of somebody, whatever it is that they're actually looking to get out of them.
We're talking about it from a perspective of dating too. So again, coming from that heterosexual standpoint, we're talking about men. However, I have kind of a friend who, it took me a long time to realize that she had a lot of narcissistic tendencies. And I'd have another friend point it out. And now when I look back on it, I think about her, how no matter what anybody else did, it was her that it was affecting, and she was the center of it. And there was no empathy for anybody else, which is one very, very telling trait of somebody with narcissistic tendencies, is that they don't have the ability to feel empathy for other people, and they feel personally attacked by anything that other people do.
Right. So since we're kind of coming at this from the space of dating, we're going to talk about that. Like, if you're going out with somebody, what are some potential red flags that you should look for? And I think probably the biggest and the most telling is paying attention to conversations. So I've had plenty of dates where the conversations felt very one-sided, and you go home and you're like, I think I know that guy's whole life story. I'm not sure if he's really convinced. I'm not convinced he knows my name at this point. And so that's always very telling to me, is okay, if you're nervous in the beginning, I get that. But as the night goes on, paying attention to the conversations, are they really grandiose when they talk about their stuff? I think that was something that maybe the guest had talked about was you're pumping themselves up so much where they don't do anything wrong. And if you ask them, well, what's something that didn't go right? They're like, well, not anything, because everything I do is perfect. Right. So being just mindful of the conversation. Again, we're not trying to, you're not having a conversation like how many red flags can I catch, because remember that's not the point of the date. Right. The point is hopefully you get to know somebody, but starting first and foremost is what is going on when you're having a conversation with somebody.
I think that's, a really good point. But that doesn't always mean when you're on a first date and somebody is nervous, sometimes that nervousness doesn't go away throughout the whole first date. And so that may or may not be a red flag. So again, it's not how many red flags can I find? It's how does my gut feel about this? And once my gut feels like something is off, what am I looking at, and helping you to maybe understand why. And I say that because my boyfriend was very much, the conversation on the first date very much revolved around him and his family. And I remember we went to a sporting event and he bought us really great seats and we were sitting right there, center ice, and I wanted to watch the game and he wanted to show me pictures of his family. And it was very one-sided conversation because I just wasn't engaged in that, because he spent all this money on these tickets for me to watch a game that he was talking to me all the way through. And so that didn't necessarily mean that either one of us were displaying or were narcissists, but it definitely meant that the first date probably didn't go in my brain the way that it went. I know it didn't go in my brain the way that it went in his brain. We still ended up together. He is definitely not a narcissist. And so sometimes it takes more than one date. So again, I'm going to go back to trust your gut. And if something feels off, examine it. But if things feel good, also trust that, because your gut's not going to lead you astray.
Well, even to like this day on first dates, I'm still really uncomfortable talking about myself. So my answers might seem like short and sweet because I'm like, let's just get back to talking about you, because I'm much more comfortable asking people questions. So to a casual observer, it might look like some of my dates were very one-sided because they were probably talking much more than I have. And it's something I'm aware of, I work on. But I think, like you said, you can't say that for sure just because somebody is dominating the conversation that yep, nope, they're a narcissist, on to the next one. It's just one of those things to be like, okay, on subsequent dates, is the dynamic changing? When they ask me questions, are they actually listening for the answer? Because I've had plenty of dates where it was like they ask a question and they're kind of like, you feel this sense of, can you hurry up and answer because I have something I want to say next. So it's looking to compound all of that information. So like when you start dating and the more you get to know them, is this something that has changed, or is not anything changing and everything is solely about them and how great they are and how wonderful their life is, and you're not feeling like you're fully getting to know the actual human that you're on a date with.
Right. And coupling that with the love bombing, and all of a sudden you have somebody telling you that they're falling in love with you after one date or three dates, but yet they haven't given you a chance to tell them anything about you. They don't know you. They just know that you're sitting across from them listening to their story. So when you couple that together, that right there would be the red flag that I would look for.
Well, and I told this story on one of the episodes this season. We were talking about first dates, and I'd met this guy online. I was in my mid to late 20s, and it was that very real sense of everything kind of got rushed, and there were a lot of gifts up front, and like not like trinket gifts, like good expensive gifts. And it was, yeah, something about this is making me uncomfortable. And then we would go on dates, and like we're like a month or two in, and he's asking me, why do I need to be hanging out with my family so much? Why do I need to be going out with my friends? And when can we start talking about me moving in? And I'm like, I am not sure I know your last name yet. So why are we talking so much about, trying to get me to move in? And it just kind of felt like he was trying to isolate me a little bit more and a little bit more. And I'm like, I don't know how I listened to my gut because in my 20s, I was just like, I couldn't trust anything I think I thought. I was like so flattered that he's a really handsome man and he had a really good job and he was promising me all of these really amazing things. And I think it was the point, and this is going to be like the weirdest tipping point. It was, he had this little Pomeranian dog. And for the man that he was like six something, well built. I'm like, the dog and him, it was not a congruent picture. But it was this point of, he's like, yeah, I would absolutely clone this dog because I don't want it to die. And I'm like, I understand the love of a pet, but I think for some reason that was like the point too far. I'm like, no, this is not going to work out. He wants to clone his dog. That was just one in a series of things. And then when I broke it off with him, it was a week of me not being able to answer the phone because he would just call incessantly and leaving these numbers like, I can't believe you broke up with me. Now I'm just going to have to go home and get drunk and it'll be all your fault if I do something stupid. And so I'm like, oh, I dodged a bullet there. But sometimes in the moment, you don't realize it because at that time he was taking me out on really fun dates and it was, it was flattering to have somebody attracted to you and want to take you out and, kind of showering you with this stuff. But then there was this point of, okay, this is not right. Something is off. And if I don't get myself out now, it was going to be, I think, way worse had I managed to be stuck with somebody, whether it was long term in a marriage, let alone you had kids and a whole bunch of other stuff in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things too, when you're talking about that, and it definitely sounds like a lot of that happened here, is we're talking about how they build themselves up and how a narcissist will tell you grandiose things about themselves, but they don't ever tell you anything deeper than the surface. And it certainly sounds like in the situation that you're talking about, like he's really not going any deeper than the surface, not letting you get to know him. And that's another trait of a narcissist that seems kind of counterintuitive when you are thinking about the fact that they're only talking about themselves and that they're dominating this conversation, yet they're not really telling you about anything about themselves and letting them get to know you. And that's because narcissism is fueled by shame, of this feeling of I am bad. So when you get that shame happening there, they're not going to let you in because if you see who they truly are, they have this fear that you're going to leave.
Well, and if you listen to the previous episode, if you haven't, go back and listen. She talked about, he said he had all of these friends. And when she pressed him further, it was like, they're not technically friends, they're acquaintances because they're not people who, if you showed up at their door, they're like, what are you doing here? But it can sound so much better to say you've got all of these friends and not just acquaintances. So I think, they learn to use language to your advantage. You're like, oh yeah, I've got all of these friends, or the way they talk about coworkers. I'm like, oh, if you talk about coworkers like that when nobody's around, what do you say about me when you're talking to other people? So, way people use language. Again, not necessarily that it's a good or bad thing, but it's all about gathering information so that you can make the best, most informed decision about who you want to date.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that we should make a note in the future that we need to do an episode on trust. Although this is about narcissism and talking about coworkers and other people in your life and using language, well, you said something really telling right there. If they're saying that to me to my face, what are they saying about me to the other people in their lives? And although it feels like you're having this bonding experience because you're having a conversation about that, it really is pushing people further apart and it's eroding trust in relationships. So totally separate point off a soapbox. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I think that's something that we should come back to at some point.
Well, it's actually in my brain not too far off of our path because when you talk about stuff like that, she mentioned trauma bonding or trauma dumping. And sometimes gossiping feels like it can kind of turn into this trauma dump where you're like, can you believe all of the stuff that so and so and so and so did to me at work? And so I feel like that's kind of the space where you have to be a little bit careful. I'm like, I'm happy to hear if you need to vent. But when it comes to this space of you're just going to dump everything on me and not provide the tools and solutions to help me deal with some of that stuff, then that's not a healthy dynamic for either of us either.
Right. And to be honest, right, if you come home and that's all you're doing is complaining and dumping trauma on somebody, that's causing them more trauma as well. And that is something that kind of moves into that next stage with somebody who's got some pretty strong narcissistic tendencies, because nobody else measures up in their mind. They're putting themselves up here on a pedestal. And again, that's because it's fueled by shame and they're not really letting anybody get to know them. So they can't relate to, or they can't handle having somebody be at their level or above, because it makes them feel worse about themselves and fuels their self-hatred.
Yeah. And I think that's the hard part, is that how do you not take it personally, right? When it's all happening to you and you can, like, in your logic brain know that so much of what they do to you is a mirror of how they feel about themselves. But it's in the moment and you're like, how is this happening to me? I feel like I'm a smart, capable, confident woman. How did I end up in this situation that I found? Maybe it's another guy that you're dating. Maybe this is the first time that you're experiencing it. And I think it can be hard to be in this space of, I thought I was smart enough to know better and to see these signs. And some people are just really good. And to know that it's not a reflection ever about you as a person. It's always about that other person. But sometimes it's hard to tell your feelings that.
Absolutely. And remember, it is other people's actions, words, and reactions are a reflection of what's on the inside of them and really has nothing to do with you. And your perception of what's going on and what's happening in the world around you and what is being presented to you from the people in your life is a reflection of how you feel on the inside and what's inside of you. So if you're taking some of that, the best way to do that is to bring it out of the dark and put it into the light, and not bury that shame inside of you if you're feeling ashamed because you develop feelings for a narcissist. And it's not saying that a narcissist is inherently evil or is unable to be loved, because that's not true either. It's just being aware of where you're at, what you want, and what steps you're going to choose to take in the relationship that you're choosing to engage in or be in.
I think that's why it's so important you have people you trust that you can talk to about these things. Because I know it's helped me in a lot of my experiences, is having that somewhat neutral third party who you can say, hey, this is what's going on. My interpretation is this. But sometimes having somebody who's not in the midst of all of those feelings, who's not in the midst of being love bombed, to be able to have that kind of outsider perspective of being like, well, it doesn't sound like you're happy, or it sounds like this is what's happening. Maybe take a look at this, or taking a journal and writing some of these things down, because stuff bouncing around in your head can get all kinds of messed up. So having either somebody you can talk to about this, having a place that you can write this down so that it's out of your head, it's on paper, you can start looking at it, I think is always a helpful way to process maybe what's going on and decide, is this something that I should be more concerned and more serious about? Or am I just nervous getting back into a relationship because maybe I jumped in too soon out of my last serious one?
True. I think it's interesting as you're talking about that and letting stuff bounce around inside your head. Have you ever received a text or an email or something from somebody and you are reading it to a friend or a family member and you put a tone of voice into it? You're reading words and you're putting a tone of voice into it. And you have to step back and go, okay, what do the words say versus how am I interpreting what the words say? And I've had people, friends when I am that will read me something and I'll be like, well, why are you putting that tone of voice on those words? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I guess that's how I interpreted them. But I've also had the other person saying, well, they said this and I took it this way. And they're like, but what do the words say? And so that written communication can get lost in translation, but sometimes so can actual interactions can get lost in translation when we're putting our own perception on the conversation based on the mood that we're in the moment. A conversation when you're angry can feel very different than the exact same conversation when you're in a good mood.
Oh, 100%, which is why text is good for communicating certain things. It should not be your primary mode of having big conversations ever. Not saying that like you said, it can get lost when you're face to face, but I think the margin for misinterpreting tone and meaning and message when it's written and you don't have that person right there is much higher than if I can see your face. And because this is something that my boyfriend and I do all of the time. If we want to have big, serious conversations, I'm like, I need to see your face. This is not about, in my brain, I process it better. I need to look in your eyes. I need to watch what's going on. For me, it makes me feel more connected when I can see your face and see what's going on. But again, the whole tone thing, I'm like, ooh, I feel called out a little bit. Because I have done that several times where I'm like, is that really the tone they would have used? No. It's like, I'm running 5 minutes late. It's not, I'm running 5 minutes late. But it's a wonderful reminder that, okay, sometimes they're just words. We're putting a meaning into them because maybe we haven't felt as connected. Maybe there's other things going on in our life. We're a little anxious. So there's so many other things that can color what goes into our interpretation. And if there's at all a question, you should be having that conversation. And if you can't have that conversation with that person, then that's also something you need to explore as well.
True, which we've talked about in other episodes too, having those conversations and whether or not you can actually have them, which then leads us to what do you do if you've seen all these red flags? And if you go back and listen to last week's episode, really talking about how to extricate yourself from that dating situation and having a plan, making sure that friends and family know what you're doing, making sure that they know where you're at and how you're going about this. And really the best piece of advice when breaking off a relationship with a narcissist is to end it, block, walk away, no communication.
Yeah. As hard as it can be, that was something that she really stressed was anytime. It's kind of like, I think with stalkers, it's that, not that they're the same thing, but it's that very real perception of in their brain, they're not thinking, oh, she replied to me. It's like, oh, if I bug her 15 times on the 16th time, she's going to respond. So I think for your own peace and your own mental well-being, just no contact, that clean break, as clean as you can make it, is really, for your sanity, probably the best way to let yourself go about the process of now having to heal and now having to reevaluate. Okay, feels like my, person picker is wrong, and really dealing with the fallout that comes with, I feel like I got everything wrong. But she said something that has stuck to me. This whole point is thanking yourself. She's like, I knew future me was going to thank present me for being brave enough to do this. And I want everybody to remember that future you is going to be so grateful that you took that deep breath, that you made a plan and that you did it. And it's going to suck and it's going to be hard and painful. And there's going to be probably tears and begging and all of this stuff. But on the other side is this space of you have this information, and going forward, you'll know better because you had this experience. You don't really want to have had to go through it, but make your future self proud and give yourself that opportunity to be like, I deserve better. I want better. But first and foremost, making sure that your safety is 100% taken care of, whether that means you have a friend in the car waiting for you, or like, our guest said, making sure multiple people knew where your location was, because you may not think that it's going to turn one way, but you just don't. Breaking up is just such a messy thing, and you never really fully know how people are going to handle that.
Absolutely. And it's a big deal, and it can lead to some very strong emotions. So if you would like us to dive deeper into that topic, drop us a note, shoot us an email at soyou'readytodate@gmail.com. Let us know. We can dive deeper into that, give you some more ideas, tips, tricks on how to do that and be safe if you're in a situation where you need some additional support in that.
I will also link the article, because we found a really great article that listed a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. So I'll make sure to put that in the show notes. So if you want to, as you're listening, go take a peek at that, or if you're just curious and want some more information, I'm going to link that. We also, in case you missed it in the last one, linked an episode with Dr. Ramani, not an episode, but the podcast with Dr. Ramani about narcissism. I'll put that link in the show notes as well. I've taken a look at a couple of her episodes and they're amazing. So if you really want to dive down this rabbit hole a little bit more, we'll put some other, what's the word I'm looking for?
Resources.
Thank you. Resources in the show notes, so that you can, be fully prepared and equipped if you want to and need more information.
And don't forget, go out and do something fun after you have listened to this. Bring that positive energy back into your life. And we'll be back next week with another great episode, and get that positive energy flowing back into our weekly scheduled program.